Residency. Today, I want to introduce Rose Bogard, who is a ceramics resident with us. I also want to introduce Qynce Chumley, who is a printmaking resident with us. And I also want to introduce Jorence Quiambao, who's a painting resident with us today. We'll hear all about their work and their process, so we appreciate you coming and supporting them. I do want to let you all know that there will be no ARTbreak next Tuesday, April 11th, but that will be back on the 18th, and that will be the rest of the Kirk Newman Art School residents on the 18th. Okay, so first up, I want to just welcome up Rose Bogard.
Hey, hi all. Thank you for coming today to hear about our experience as residents and to see some art. My name is Rose Bogard and I am one of the ceramic residents. And so a little background about me. I graduated from Kalamazoo College last spring, where I actually took my first ever wheel throwing class my freshman year with Julie. And I loved it, but unfortunately I didn't end up taking another ceramics class until the end of my junior year when I took a mold processes class. And that sort of ended up being the start of everything. So my previous work and my work today definitely has an overarching objective of creating functional ceramic work that offers sort of a tactile experience and a unique personality. And so what I love most about ceramics is the endless processes and reactions and approaches to making. And I find inspiration in how vastly different both the end results and the physical process can be based on the mode of making. And so what I want to take you all through today is both my process of making individual pieces and my previous work, but also of sort of being an artist and my relationship with clay and how that has deepened and changed throughout this residency. And while I do feel that many themes such as texture and function have remained constant throughout my work, my approach and my process has broadened significantly throughout this past year. And so I want to start with my previous work. And so all of these pieces that I'm going to show you were made from combining found objects as models to make plaster molds of. And so this first one, Objects at Play, this one, I had a lot of fun with this piece. So the original model used was two mass-produced bowls at the bottom, sort of glued together, an orange, a lemon, a shot measurer, and all under a pair of lace tights. And so I just sort of loved being able to remove these objects from their intended environments and combine and manipulate them to make them almost unrecognizable in a completely new form. But what I think that I loved most about this piece was how the form and the glaze really worked together to capture a feeling of joy and playfulness. And sort of how an object can express so many emotions and feelings. And I really wanted the viewers to interact with my pieces and have their own unique experience with each piece. And so as you can tell, I sort of have a common theme of texture throughout my work. And these cups, also mold made, were inspired actually by breakfast burritos. And I do food prep, so I make a lot of breakfast burritos and I wrap them in tinfoil. And so one morning I was unwrapping my burrito and just became really fascinated by the tinfoil and the texture of it and sort of like the variation in crinkles based on how much I manipulated the material. And so I built a form and took a mold of it and came up with these. And so in a similar way to before, I just really loved the mystery and guessing of what material or objects were being used, which I felt left more room for the audience to have their own relationship with the objects and to sort of make their own associations to the work. And so this one, I'm not going to go too much into detail on all my previous works, but this one was made from beaded lampshades. These were squashes. These ones were made from paper. And lastly, this cup was made with fabric. And so this was sort of the last piece I completed before graduating and coming to the residency, and the first piece that I ever made using fabric. I was really intrigued by the malleability of the material and the variation in the material, whether that be lace, leather, denim, or any of the other various textured fabrics that you can find. And I was just curious to see how I could manipulate that material. And so at the start of the residency, I made a plaster mold of a model I sewed together using pieces of an old leather purse. And what I gained from this was seeing how precisely the stitching was captured. But I wasn't totally happy with this piece, and I sort of felt like it was lacking this feeling of being made with fabric. I just wasn't sure that the application and the finished form were successfully working together to sort of give credit to the process and the material that I was using. And it was also at this moment that I hit a little bit of a wall. The previous year, I had been really excited to make molds. And I think that after, graduating school, I was just sort of experiencing a little bit of burnout. And I realized that enjoying the process was sort of my new first priority. And so I decided to move away from molds, and I started hand building, and I began to feel really excited about being in the studio again. And it felt really lovely to have my hands like physically in clay again, because molds was sort of removed from that for me, and I was just using slip. And so I knew that I wanted to still include textures, and so these pieces sort of felt like my transition pieces. These were kind of me falling back in love with clay and just exploring and having fun. And so I never really had a form in mind before I started making these. I was just using different hand building techniques and combining slabs and rolling textures. And I think that was sort of exactly what I needed to do in this moment. And so then for second semester, I signed up for wheel throwing and soft sculpture, which I think you'll find to be sort of apparent in my work from the term. This piece was my first response to making pressed molds of fabric and using them to hand build with slabs. And I was pretty happy with the amount of character and personality that this piece had, as well as sort of this sense of stuffing and volume, and how the stitching was captured. And I felt like it sort of gave more appreciation to the material and the process being used than my previous leather cup that I showed you. But I was still sort of facing a little bit of a problem, and that was that I was really enjoying my wheel throwing. I don't know what that is, sorry. I was really enjoying my wheel throwing class. So I was trying to find a way to sort of successfully combine these pressed molds and the textures in a cohesive way with my wheel thrown work. And so this was sort of my way of expressing my curiosity of working with fabric and molds, and also sort of your traditional wheel-thrown form. So I started hand building these pillow-like forms from press molds of a soft sculpture that I made in class. And my plan is to use these forms as a way to display my wheel-thrown cups. And it sort of felt like a happy solution to a lot of the problems that I faced throughout the term. And I was just happy that I got to throw and I got to hand build and I got to sort of explore the transformation and replication of one material to another, and sort of celebrate that in my work. And so what I want these pieces to convey is sort of this relationship with clay and how that has changed throughout this year for me. And I want these pillows to sort of symbolize like royalty and to be very extravagant in the end. But I also need to figure out how to achieve that in a way that doesn't distract from the cups that they'll be holding. And I want these pieces to represent sort of my appreciation for the simple wheel-thrown form. And that when I got frustrated and fell out of touch with clay, I was able to turn to my foundations with wheel throwing. And this project isn't to say that I won't ever do slip cast molds again, but just sort of rather to showcase my process this year and my falling back in love with clay post-school and wheel throwing. And I've just been very appreciative of this residency for allowing me the space to be confused and unsure. And I'm grateful for all the problems that I've run into along the way, because I learned something new about me and clay with each one and our relationship together. And so I'm very excited to show you all my finished pieces at our show May 5th. And I just want to thank you all for listening, and thank you to all the faculty and class instructors and residents who helped me get here through critiques and exchanging of ideas. And also a special thank you to Julie and Eve in the ceramics department for all their help brainstorming and support throughout. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Courtney.
Do you think you would still be working with that fabric-like texture if you tried other mediums, or is there something about the clay and fabric that fit well for you?
I think something about the clay and the fabric that fit well for me. I just really enjoy the versatility of clay and how like exactly it can capture the feeling of other materials. And I haven't worked a ton outside of clay, so I'm sure there are lots of other materials that have that quality as well, but I'm kind of into clay. I think I'm a little too deep into it now, so.
Yeah, they're stunning.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all for listening, and next up is Qynce.
Hi, I'm Qynce. I'm one of the printmaking residents, and I am also a cartoonist and a zine maker and a recovering painter, and I'm going to be talking about my work today. And the first thing that I want to start is talking about my bio that I wrote for myself. I'll read it. So Qynce B. Chumley is a he/him lesbian, but only when they're printmaking. They make comics, scenes, prints, and trouble, and they are from southern, so-called Illinois. And I wanted to start with my bio because I really like having the opportunity to like write about my work as a way of like really intentionally like framing the work that I make. And I think like a common thread in the way that I approach my art making is this sense of like it's not just a lack of like taking itself seriously, but it's doing like the opposite of what that is, which I was told last night the word for that is irreverent. And that's like really important to me as an artist and as like a person, because it's really extremely and inextricably tied up with my experience of doing gender as a queer trans person. And the ways that I like to gender and the ways that I make art feel like completely interlocked for me, like they're inseparable. And sort of as part of that, existing as a trans person in this world that we live in is sort of by definition means existing in opposition and existing as like an antagonist or a transgressor. I think especially during this time of like escalating fascist violence against trans people, that's especially true. And that's kind of what I like am sort of getting at when I say like I make trouble, because to like be a trans person is just to make trouble in this world. And a lot of the ways that I think about and go about making and practicing art come from the same place of like antagonism and transgression. And so I think that's like a really necessary thing to understand when you're engaging with my art. And so that's why I'm like really intentional about like the words that I use to describe my art. And that's why I was like really disappointed when I got my copy of Sightlines, which is like the KNAS magazine, and saw that this wasn't the bio that was printed in it. And this was the bio that was printed. And it was like changed without any conversation with me. I didn't know until I like got the copy. And I was just really disappointed that like all the most crucial and like relevant parts were taken out. And also frankly, like all the most like political parts were taken out of it. And you can draw your own conclusions from that. And I was disappointed by this, but it also like provides a pretty good entry point for talking about something that I feel is really important about my art, which kind of is getting at in this Why Cheap Art manifesto from Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont, which is a project that I think is really cool that I only learned about really recently. A copy of this is pinned up in the printmaking studio downstairs, and that's where I first found it. And this call of like why cheap art really strongly resonated with me, and I feel like I saw it and I was like, oh, this is like putting to words all the things I've been trying to say for years about art, but I didn't have these exact words for it. And yeah, I'm gonna like show you my work in a second, but I do think that like I'm gonna take this time to talk about this, and to say that like in a month, all the residents are having a group show, and my work is going to be displayed in that show, and it's going to be like displayed on pedestals or like possibly behind glass, depending on how we set up the show. And I just wanted to like frame something and say that like that's not really how my work is intended to be displayed. It's like a compromise that I'm willing to make for the sake of having the resources to make my art. And I think that's something that artists are constantly doing, is like negotiating and figuring out what compromises we're willing to make for the sake of like having resources. And it's something that I feel like I am in so many conversations, like private conversations with artists about this, but it's not something that gets talked about in public very often. But yeah, the work that I'm making is really meant to like live on people's bookshelves or be stuffed into backpacks or passed between friends and scanned and put on the internet for free with or without my permission. I don't really care about copyright. It's meant to get dirty and fall apart and be forgotten and then be rediscovered later. It's like not really made to exist within an institution. And I'm not really like here to exist as an artist to perform for institutions either. That being said, let's talk about my work. So I have a lot of different art practices that I do, and today I'm just focusing on 3 of them, which is my comics, my zines, and my printmaking. I am a printmaking resident, so that's important. My comics, I've been making comics since 2012 at least, although really I've been making comics since I was a kid, but around this time is when I started really intentionally making comics and sharing them with people on the internet. And I used to make a web comic, which is what this picture on the left is an excerpt of the very last page of the webcomic. I abandoned it around the time I started college. And webcomic culture was like really important to like an important foundational experience for me as like an artist. It's informed a lot of the work that I've made afterwards. And yeah, I've made lots of comics, including a lot of journal comics. And last year, I self-published my like debut book as a cartoonist. It's a 180-page comic book. The story is something I originally wrote during my senior year of college as a play in a playwriting class. And when I wrote it, I knew that I wanted to adapt it into a comic eventually, but I sat on it for a couple years and then decided, yeah, I really want to do this. I applied for a Caddy grant and received it to help pay for like the printing costs and things like that. And yeah, I published it last summer. I have copies that you can buy from me. I have some with me. If you want one after the talk, let me know. And the story of Glued in Place is, it's about Qynce. They're like a recent college grad who moves back to their small rural hometown. It's about them and their relationship with their brother. And it's about their experience at this job that they get where they have these coworkers who they have a series of arguments with about like gender and class and other things. It's really inspired by my experience growing up in a small rural Midwestern town, as well as my experiences in college and jobs that I've had. And you can buy it from me. I have 200 copies in my bedroom. Please take them. So I also make zines. And just like a very quick explanation of what a zine is. It's like a little self-published DIY booklet that, yeah, it's hard to explain what a zine is without just like handing you one. I've been making zines since around 2016. I started making zines in college and used my like free print credits to just print off hundreds of copies of them and leave them around campus or give them away to people. The most recent zine that I made is this one on the right called This Is What They See. And this is a zine that I screen printed by hand. It's a 3-color screen print. I also have copies of that if anyone wants one. And yeah, my zine work in general is like, it's very impulsive and imperfect, and it's like necessarily done very quickly. When I sit down to make a zine, I just do it as quick as possible and think as little as possible. And going forward with zines, I'm really trying to explore like these like hand printed zines because those are really exciting to me. Another thing I do is I table at a lot of zine fests. The culture around zines is really fun for me because it's very like scrappy and DIY, and often and historically it exists in opposition to institutions. Primarily, like it exists as an opposition to the institution of like mainstream publishing, because in zines you can just make whatever you want and put it out into the world without like asking people for permission or worrying if it's going to be marketable or not. And that's what's really exciting to me about zines and zine culture. And a quick shout out, the second annual Kalamazoo Zine Fest is going to be on August 5th this year, and everybody should go to it. Okay, and then, so I'll talk about my printmaking. I've done printmaking on and off for the last 8 years or so, and before this residency, I'd mostly really just done like lino cut relief printing, and most of what I did looked like this. It was just a single color, often black, and it was like really solid black lines. And I think my like this printmaking work and my comics work are very like in conversation with each other. But during this residency, I wanted to like experiment and learn about more printmaking techniques that I hadn't tried before. So I made my first 2-color relief print. And this is actually printed on like a puzzle blank. So it's a 50-something piece puzzle that I made for the holiday sale in December. I took several printmaking classes, so I learned about lithography. I wasn't a big fan of like the fast-paced, high-stress process of lithography, but I did make some cool prints in that class. I learned about screen printing, which I'd never done before, and that was really fun and has like opened a lot of possibilities for me. And I started doing bookmaking, which is something I always wanted to do and has just been like really essential and like mind-blowing for me to be able to like sit down and make a book is pretty wild. And another class that I took was tool carving. So I made some like bookmaking tools, like a bone folder and an awl out of bones. And that was fun. And all of this has kind of been like in preparation to complete my project for this residency, which is it's going to be an edition of 10 hand-printed and hand-bound comic books. And I'm mostly using lino cut relief printing because it's what I'm most familiar with and I feel good working in that, but I am trying out this new technique that I'd never tried before of like jigsaw printing, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I've also incorporating what I learned in bookmaking and screen printing to create the final thing. So the jigsaw printing, what I started with was in this bottom left image is like the main print. And I carved this out of a block, and it's these figures dancing and sitting around a fire. And then after I carved it all, I then like cut all of the characters out and created these little shapes, and then made copies of those shapes out of other pieces of linoleum so that these characters could be actually taken out of the block and then replaced with a piece of linoleum of the same exact shape, but which is like empty, as some of these are, or they have a different character carved into them. And it's kind of hard to explain this process without having the block here and like showing you. But I do have this animation of what this will look like in the book. So over the course of the book, it's the same print, but it changes. So a character gets taken out, and then more get taken out. And eventually they start to be replaced by different characters than were originally there. And so the book in total will have 17 different versions of this. And over the course of the book, the characters change. And another thing that happens is that these pieces start to get more fractured and further away from each other. So if you go back to the beginning, they're all really tightly packed. And over the course of the book, they start to spread out. And this is a mock-up of what the final book will look like. I really want every component of the book to be really intentional and feel like handmade and sort of have this like scrappy DIY vibe to it. So this like the cover, the like book cloth on the cover is fabric that I bought at a thrift store and then over dyed with black and red to make it darker. And these end papers are a screen print that I did. So they're a 3-color screen print and it's like a repeating pattern. So I print it repeating on like a big piece of paper and then cut it down to size. The title of this book is Singly None, and that comes from a very old like Union song, and it's going to be printed on the book plate. On the inside of the book, one of my other artistic practices is making music. I like sing 100-year-old labor protest songs with friends. And yeah, in this mock-up, the title on the front of the cover and this book plate are just like hand drawn, but in the final book, they're going to be printed either using relief or screen printing. I'm not sure yet. Yeah, so that's what I'm working on, and I have pretty much all of the prep work done, and now over the next month, I'm just going to be like putting it all together. And you'll be able to see it at the show on May 5th. We just decided the title of the show last night. It's going to be called Through Lines. And I want to say thanks, especially to Deb, the head of the printmaking department, who's really great, and Courtney, who's been super helpful, all my fellow residents and all my friends and all trans people who have ever existed. And also thanks to the Arts Council for giving me a professional development grant, which helped me be able to participate in this residency program. Thanks. And I can also take any questions.
So are your original zines technically like hand bound, or is that a different process from what book you're making?
Yeah, so most of the zines that I make, a lot of them are these like mini zines that are just printed on one piece of like standard printer size paper, and then they fold up into these little 8-page booklets. A lot of the other zines that I make are, so like in the picture on the left, these like slightly bigger zines are like a series of pieces of paper all like stacked together and then just folded in half and stapled on the edge. Yeah. Yeah, somebody way in the back.
Hey.
Hi.
Thank you for leading in your disappointment and the institutional inappropriateness of the key parts of your biography being omitted. Point well taken. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I just have a comment. You described the book as scrappy, like a scrappy style, but I just want to point out the level of craftsmanship you're achieving to be that scrappy is very much admired. It's just a very high quality, crafted scrappiness.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well then, if there's no other questions, the next artist up is Jorence. Take her on.
Hi everyone, how are you?
Good.
Thank you. I just had a realization that I was starting and got really nervous. Can we all just like sigh on 3? 1, 2, 3. I'm just kidding. Hi, my name is Jorence Quiambao. I am 23 years old and I grew up here in Kalamazoo since I moved here from the Philippines when I was 6. And then after graduating high school, I got my bachelor's from Kalamazoo College, where I studied studio art and art history, graduating with honors and cum laude. Woo! In Kalamazoo College, you are responsible for completing a senior individualized project, SIP for short. And my project was called Sip Sip, a play on words because this was my SIP, but also Sip Sip is one of the titles of my first painting on the left, which translates in Tagalog as Suck. It represents the story of the Manananggal, but as a superhero in a comic book. The Manananggal is a self-segmenting vampire creature that feasts on the unborn children of pregnant people. Now, why would I create a superhero out of her? Well, you see, there's a theory that because of the rise in Manananggal stories happening during the time of Spanish colonization, it was believed that the Manananggal was a story created to deter people from seeking the help of leaders in the community. Leadership roles that were fulfilled mostly by women and trans people. You see, pre-Hispanic Philippines had a very queer community, and this was not to the Spanish's liking. So once fear has been spread, the need for these leadership roles decreased, thus changing gender dynamics in the Philippines. Painting her as a superhero counters what colonizers were trying to do and gives this folklore a different narrative to focus on, which is the value that these leadership roles had in a community, just like we value our heroes. The second painting is titled Wag, which translates to don't in the Philippines. The story of the eclipse was told through the story of what the Pampangans called Lawu, a serpent that would try to eat the moon. If Lawu succeeds, a famine occurs. If Lawu is deterred from eating the moon, that means good harvest. The people would have festivals to create noise and would yell at the serpent in hopes of deterring the beast away and gaining good harvest for the year. I portrayed this story but told it through a drag queen performing this ritual at a drag bar. The audience yells out Wag to deter the drag queen from eating the moon, thus good harvest. Sip Sip and Wag were part of a series of watercolor paintings that showcase Filipino folklore beings using comic book aesthetics to narrate the history and evolution of these beings. My work explores queer identity while also exploring mythos from the indigenous Filipino tribes of the Tagalogs, Visayan, and Pampangans, and how these two identities intertwine and evolve under colonialism. For the KIA, I knew that I wanted to continue this exploration, and I decided to focus this time on the deities, specifically the love story of Bulan and Sadapa, the moon god and the god of death, the trans goddess Ikapati, and the goddess of lost things, Anakalai. The first mythos I decided to tackle was the Tagalog deity Anakalai, but I was stuck on how to represent lost things. I found myself in this endless cycle of existential dread, thinking about how I'm going to represent quote unquote lost. What things get lost easily? What may someone find with Anakalai? And what have I lost? And during this time, it was what my generation would call my flop era. An era to my eyes where I have failed. You see, asking myself what I lost created an even more prominent awareness of my current life situation at the time. I couldn't find a job, and I felt so discarded from a system that has been my life for the past 23 years. Thrown into this jungle of economic crisis, political climate, and fresh out of a pandemic, I was just an absolute wreck, coming so high from graduating with honors to getting rejected by 10 jobs every week and fearing for my rights every day. I was existentially dreading life every week. And so I needed to step away from focusing on what was lost because it just wasn't good for my mental health. So taking a break from that question of how do I represent loss, I wanted to focus on my time here at K, where I got to take a Procreate class and start working more with digital art, which I have kind of found a new love for. I did end up finding a job as a graphic designer and marketing specialist. So this Procreate class has even helped me better my work and kind of hurt my wallet because I think I'm gonna start saving up for more digital art equipment. These are just some of the photo shoots that I did and edited through Procreate. And then that was just a collage that I made on Instagram. And I also got to take several watercolor classes, one of which has been the highlight of my winter. Watercolor expressionism with Susan Badger literally saved my artistic life. This evening class full of this wonderful group of women who just talk about their day and the art they made was such a joy. And it truly was a treat to be able to take the class. And it's so weird because I just came from an academic setting, so art to me was a requirement. I needed to do it for a grade and for academic success. And this thirst for success created a very stressful relationship to creating. And taking this class and my other classes, I've sort of discovered a new joy in creating to just create. It doesn't matter if you finish or if you decide to pause and move on to your next project, or maybe you want to try something new, just do it. You're not going to get graded. Creating art because you want to and it makes you happy. This is what I learned from that class, and my outlook on my work shifted. I decided to not focus on the hard questions that got me stuck and just decided to go for it. I'm just going to create, sketch some things out, and start creating. So I decided to skip Anagalai from there and continue with the love story of Bulan and Sidapa. I'm referring to the painting on the left. Bulan was one of the moon gods, and Sidapa was the god of death. Sidapa was just smitten for Bulan, so much so that he sent all the birds to sing to Bulan. He made the flowers on the earth so fragrant it reached him in the heavens, and he created a path of fireflies to lead Bulan to Sadapa. If that isn't the best gay romance story, I don't know what is. Well, as with most of my work, I researched a lot, and that's when I came across an expose that discovered how this story had no origin from the past and was created in this lifetime. I was devastated, another loss. I was grieving this ending, and it was really discouraging until I had a day where I got on a call with my two best friends, Kobe and Katrina, seeking just validation and a shoulder to cry on about my grievances in life. So Katrina has a master's in Indigenous science and peace studies. So when I told her about this dilemma, she said to me, "Girl, don't be focused on that." She states that these stories are real because they have been created. That is in essence what mythos and folklore is, stories created and shared, which just touched me so emotionally because at that point, everything came together. And so I created these two mock-ups for my paintings. Rather than using the comic book aesthetic, I focused on specifically a comic book cover. And Wonder Woman has DC Comics, Scarlet Witch has Marvel, and in this universe, it is Anagalized Comics. You see, I decided that these paintings were more than just paintings of these myths, rather painting myth-making itself. By giving the viewer this cover presentation, I want them to think about what the inside of these comic books may be. The stories that can be told, stories that were once lost due to colonialism that were collected by Anagalai, the goddess of lost things, to reintroduce to the world. So how do I represent lost things? Rather than focusing on what was lost, I channeled what Indigenous Filipinos and other Indigenous societies have relied on to this day, the creation of new worlds through loss. Although we have lost so many things due to colonization, it is imperative to continue creating because it is a survival mechanism. Katrina says that in her studies, they teach her that you have to look back in order to move on to the future. The first phase of my residency, I looked back on the things that I lost, and in turn, I was able to discover a new love for creating, which fed my work to represent loss through survival. Nothing is truly lost. A Nagalai can find anything that is lost. Most importantly, Indigenous people have been able to create new worlds through what was lost. It is how they survived. All this time, I just find it so funny that through questioning what is lost, I have found what was missing in my life. That joy of creating art for creation and to continue sharing my stories and the stories of my people. Under this residency, I have learned that my paintings are more than just representations, but they are a survival mechanism. These stories exist and will persist through telling them and passing these stories from one person to the next. Thank you to the KIA for allowing me this year to just grow and just further develop my art. Thank you for Courtney for everything. Has answered a lot of my questions and helped me print a lot of things out. And just thank you to all my classmates in the KIA. It was just a really lovely time, and I had such fond memories of this time of growth. Questions?
What first attracted you about Philippine folklore?
It's just the stories that I grew up with, and I always thought they were so cool. I just compared to I just love mythos in general, and to me, what's so special about Filipino folklore is how insane the creatures are. Just like the manananggal is just like this lady that at night splits in half and like murders people, which is just like such a difference from like a hydra's head who you cut off and like it grows back. I don't know. It's just cooler to me, and it's the stories that I grew up with, so I kind of had a bias, I guess. Thank you.